It is the Lehocky Eagles postgame show live from Ocean Casino. You're watching us on 6abc.com and the JAKIB Sports YouTube channel. Right now for some analysis, the man who covers the Eagles for JAKIB Media, of course, the great John McMullen. John, let me ask you, I don't know, this is kind of a general fancy question. Was this game a window into the soul of their Super Bowl aspirations?
Oh, that's deep, Mike.
It's very deep.
Go into their soul of Super Bowl aspirations. I like it. It's certainly a confidence issue. You know, this one will hit you pretty hard, especially coming back to back with San Francisco. This league has a way of piling on. Just when you start to question yourself. And obviously, Dallas was always going to be a difficult situation. They've won now 15 straight there. The Eagles have lost 6 straight. So it's not like they've had a lot of success there to begin with. Cowboys are a very good team. So I don't think it's the end of the world. They still have their destiny in their own hands when it comes to division. They need a little help with San Francisco, but they have to fix some things. And boy, I mean, this is the first time, I believe it's the first time since the Carson Wentz playoff game against Seattle they haven't scored an offensive touchdown. It's certainly the first time in the Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts era. So that is something you look at and say, what the heck is going on there? You have the 3 fumbles, obviously, in Dallas territory, but other than the Jalen Hurts one, you never like to fumble, but I do think from the standpoint of people are blowing that out of proportion. The game was already over when AJ fumbled and Devontae fumbled. So, you know, I'm not gonna lean on that as a crutch. They got completely outplayed, and if you look at it defensively, the defense is a disaster right now. Seth and I went back and forth about what they should do. They can't do anything, so it really doesn't matter what they do on that back 7. They finished 9 of 16 giving up third downs. They were 9 of 14 to start, the Cowboys. 3 of 3 in the red zone. They came in dead last in the NFL. That will continue on third down defense. Red zone defense, they'll probably fall back even further from 29th. Considering that's what Nick Sirianni preaches, situational football, that is a disaster, as I said. Sean Desai, boy, somewhere Jonathan Gannon's spiking a football. They hated him, and this is ridiculous what this defense is doing, especially with this front. And I wish I had the answer for you, but right now they just don't have anything on the back end. They keep throwing. We saw Calais Ringo out of nowhere today. Even though Slay's banged up with a knee injury, you know, you would think it seemed like Eli Riggs had passed Josh Jobe, and all of a sudden they throw Calais Ringo out there. It just seems like they're throwing stuff at the wall. Shaq Leonard coming in instead of just, you know, trying to get better with Nick Morrow and Zach Cunningham. It's not a good picture right now.
John, as far as the offense goes, you mentioned most likely the first game since without Carson Wentz, now with Jalen Hurts, that they haven't scored an offensive touchdown since that Carson Wentz playoff game against Seattle. I'm trying to uncover, we asked Derek Gunn about it earlier. Obviously, there's more than just one person to blame in all this, but is it Nick Sirianni? Is it Brian Johnson? Is it Jalen Hurts? Who do we look for, offensively speaking, as the person that can establish a rhythm with the weapons on this offense?
Well, I always start with the players first. I mean, it's always, and good or bad, it's always players first. It's always the talent not executing. Obviously, they probably would have scored a touchdown. And think about those 3 fumbles: Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. I mean, if those 3 guys are going to fumble in Dallas territory, you're going to have a long night. And give Dallas credit, give Al Harris credit, give that defensive staff credit. Nobody takes the football away better than they do. But still, that's very rare for those, certainly AJ and Devontae. in those types of situations. So that's obviously just a poor performance. But what stands out to me about the offense is they they get the ball to three receivers. We know it's AJ, Devontae, and Dallas Goedert. Nobody else had a reception except Olamide Zaccheaus, and that was from Braden Mann, the punter.
Yeah, John, real quick. John, real quick on that. When's the last time you saw that from an Eagles quarterback?
Boy, I got to dig deep for that. I mean,
Jalen's never done
it. Point, at some point you're dumping it off to the back. Or, maybe a backup tight end, maybe your third receiver gets involved. Nobody else gets involved except Oz on a fake punt. To me, that's unacceptable. And we know, the progression is always going to be AJ, Devontae, Dallas, or some combination of that. But you got to have something. You got to have a curveball to make it easier for those guys. So, but if you want to blame the coaching staff, and Nick will be the first one to say it, and I hear all the time, and Brian Johnson, these game plans are Nick Sirianni's game plans. He doesn't call plays because he doesn't want to call plays, because he wants to manage the game. And if you watch Kyle Shanahan, that's a good thing, by the way. But when it comes to game planning and things like that, Nick Sirianni puts it together. He's in charge of it. He nixes something if he doesn't like it. He puts something in if he doesn't like it. This is his offense. He's on record. Shane Steichen, Brian Johnson could be 5 coordinators down the line. As long as Nick Sirianni's here, it's going to be his offense.
Yeah, John, I never would have thought in the offseason, if you would have told me the best coordinator on this team this season would be Michael Clay.
Michael Clay.
I would have told you were crazy, man, but that's how it looks right now. But I want to talk about that defense for a second. You look at the personnel on that defense, and I'm a big Howie Roseman fan. He does a great job. But you look at that defense, and there is a severe lack of young talent that has been drafted outside of the defensive tackle position. No denying he brought in Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, and Milton Williams. But then you look at the rest of that defense, you got to go all the way back to probably 2018 when they drafted Josh Sweat to find a guy on defense that this team drafted and developed. Do you think that's going to be a problem? You look at next season where we're going to say, hey, we got to replenish this roster. They really haven't been able to do it through the draft, John.
Well, they didn't draft him, but they developed T.J. Edwards.
And they let him go.
Wasn't good enough. I do wonder, I talked about Ringo. He's thrown out there. He had one snap before tonight. And this is obviously week 14, game 13. And people are surprised he doesn't look good. The Eagles shouldn't be surprised. Maybe, Jim Schwartz used to call them startup costs. Maybe the better way to do these things is to play your young players, get through those startup costs, develop them that way, instead of going out and saying, oh, let's get every player off the scrap heap that the fan base knows. And maybe Shaq Leonard helps down the line, but I mean, you're in week 14. What's he going to do? Granted, some injuries in the slot, but if you wanted to use Rex or Sidney Brown, play them, develop them. You got to see Sidney Brown. There were some bad moments, but you also got to see the athleticism, the range he has. When Reed Blankenship went down with the concussion, who knows? If he were getting snaps earlier, maybe he's farther ahead of the game. I think the Eagles have gone too far into the Band-Aid category when it comes to bringing in veteran players. And I get it. They're a Super Bowl contender, and maybe you don't want to rely on younger players. But maybe you lose a game early in the season, you're better equipped to win a game late in the season. I don't see a lot of speed and athleticism on the back end, and I think that's a problem.
John, I'm gonna disagree with you on two things. I don't believe that the Eagles are very good at developing talent. I really don't. I think that, you went and you brought in an A.J. Brown, a guy, who is physically more superior than most of the wide receivers in this league. I believe that you drafted a Devontae Smith, a guy who has tremendous skill sets. I believe that, you inherited a Dallas Goedert, a guy that was already trending in the right direction. And on the defensive side, who have we developed since Nick Sirianni and his staff has been here? I don't see, other wide receivers taking the leap. We've been waiting for Quez Watkins to take that next step. Aaron Moorhead has not gotten him to be able to do that because we've had to go and bring in Olamide Zaccheaus. We've had to go in and bring in Julio Jones to try to shore that area up. On the defensive side of the ball, defensive backs coach. I'm looking for him here because I don't know him right off.
It's DK McDonald. It was Denard Wilson.
Yeah, I feel like under Denard Wilson, our defensive backs were much more technically sound, and they played a hell of a lot better. I look at the older guys, and you can call it, father time catching up with them or whatever it is, but they're technically flawed. All of them. Even the young guys are technically flawed in the way that they cover. When I watch them cover, there's this sense of panic when they're in man-to-man. There's this sense of uncertainty, when they're in zone, like they don't know, what zones they're responsible for or what to do when guys start to swap in and out of their zones. I don't see this Eagles staff. I haven't seen this Eagles staff, in my opinion, since Nick Sirianni has been the head coach as a staff, other than a guy like Jeff Stoutland and a guy like Tracy Rocker. Those guys man the trenches. Yes, they have been, developers of football players. But every other position across the board, with the exception of maybe Jalen Hurts as well, I don't see this staff as a staff that can take a young player and look at his skill sets and be able to mold and form him into a player that we can say that we developed that guy. If he doesn't come here with the skill set, with the ability, I don't see our coaching staff as having the ability to develop players. That's from my football eye.
Well, I think I don't think that's completely fair. I mean, you kind of gave a pass to the offensive defensive line, so I won't bring up a guy like Milton Williams, who I think has turned into a pretty good player. But one of the things I've criticized Howie for, I brought up TJ. They developed TJ. They developed Marcus Epps. And I let him walk. Marcus Epps knocked Justin Jefferson out of the game today with a big hit. And he's a starting safety. And they developed these players, and for whatever reason, they decided they were too expensive, even though they weren't all that expensive. And all of a sudden, you're chasing veterans to provide what they gave you, and they're not even providing what they gave you. So I think if we look back on it, and I think if the Eagles don't turn this around, that's something that we'll harp on a little bit more. There are certain positions, wide receiver being most notably. I mean, they tried and they tried and they tried. They made mistakes, and they finally had to go out and get A.J. Brown. They were able to draft Devontae Smith, so they finally fixed the issue. Dallas Goedert's a second-round pick they developed. So there's good players all over this team. We're talking after two very bad losses. They're still 10-3. They still have one of the best rosters in the NFL. I wouldn't call this a bad organization when it comes to developing players. I think they made some mistakes. I mean, you look at Christian Ellis. It's funny. I wrote a story about Christian Ellis because they overthought it, and they tried to manipulate everything they could when it came to roster flexibility. They put him on waivers. They don't even play Albert Wegmanon when Dallas is in the game. He's inactive. They don't play Rashad Penny. They could have gotten these guys through waivers, and if they didn't, who cares? Sue Opeta could have gotten them through waivers. If they didn't, who cares? 6 teams claim Christian Ellis. I don't know if he's going to turn into anything, but 6 teams in this league, and that's very rare, trust me. I've been covering this league for a long time. I don't recall a guy who's been claimed by 6 different teams. That tells me how he made the rare mistake of trying to get as much roster flexibility. He kept Ben Van Sumeren. Christian Ellis has played more special teams snaps than anybody else for this team. Again, it's not a big deal, but I think this team is too hyper-focused on the Super Bowl window when it comes to younger players.
Well, John, I tell you what, we talked about this in the pregame, this whole Christian Ellis thing. As bad as Nicholas Morrow played last week, they could have cut him and he would have cleared waivers before Christian Ellis. Christian Ellis has been a stellar, special teams players, and teams have noticed that. They've seen that. So that was a major error that Howie hardly ever makes. But I will say this, we've been talking about a team who struggled in various areas all year long, and we've given them passes because they were 7-0 and 8-0, and then 8-1 or 9-1 and 9 and then 10-1 and then 10-2. And I'm just as guilty as everybody else because sometimes you fall into the trap. Well, they're winning and they're finding ways to win. That's a good thing. But they've talked about the standard all year, and they've been trying to find the standard all year long, and they have not been able to find it on both sides of the ball. The only standard that they've lived up to is on the special team side of the ball all season long. That's the only one that we can point to and say they are no longer the Achilles heel of this football team. When I watch this football team, John, I see a flawed team. I see a flawed team fundamentally. I see a flawed team technically. And I see a flawed team from a game plan standpoint. And these are things that you don't fix in week 15, week 14, week 16. At this point in time, they are who they are. And how are they going to fix this? I believe that this team has peaked already, winning the amount of games that they won. And I feel like they're on the other side of the mountain. They're coming down. Rather than peaking at the right time, I feel like they peaked early, and now they're on the downside of the mountain on the other side. That's just my opinion.
Well, and that's what the NFL is, and you're coming off not only one bad loss but 2 bad losses. But I will say this: there's only 4 teams in this league at 10-3. Other than San Francisco, which lost 3 games when Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel were out, and they look like the best team in football when those guys play. I mean, Dallas got destroyed by San Francisco. Baltimore barely got to 10 wins today by holding off the Rams in overtime at home, and they very well could have lost that game. So the context, I'll try to add, and I know everybody's disappointed. This happens to every team in this league. It just hasn't happened to the Eagles in a very long time. It finally has. It doesn't mean they can't right the ship. I'd be stunned if they lost to the Giants or the Arizona Cardinals. Seattle, we'll see if Geno Smith is back, Drew Lock starts. I mean, all of a sudden, if they finish 4 straight, people say, well, they beat nobody, and they might be right. But 14 wins is 14 wins. And they're, maybe they'll be the number 1 seed. Maybe they'll be the number 2 seed at worst, because if they win out, they would still win the NFC East. Then they're in a good position. Then, maybe they don't match up well with San Francisco, but you're a Trent Williams sprained ankle away from matching up well with San Francisco. So I wouldn't say raise the white flag just yet on the Philadelphia Eagles. But they have a lot of things to correct. That's fair to say.
John, let's talk about the defense a little bit here, because I think this was said by you maybe on the show a couple shows ago. If they don't get home to the quarterback, their defense isn't very good at all. And I have some numbers to prove that. Dak Prescott's 25 dropback, first 25, they got 5 pressures on him. That's 20%. That's pathetic. On third down, the Eagles only sack the quarterback, and this is why they stay on the defense, can't get off the field. They allow these third down conversions all the time. On third down, the Eagles only sack the quarterback 5.1% of the time. That's the worst in the NFL. So my question is, can they scheme their way past these deficiencies?
No, they can't scheme they're not going to be able to scheme their way. We've seen this scheme. They're not going to be able to scheme their way past their deficiencies. That's when you have to rely on, and maybe it's, maybe it's the rookie wall with Jalen Carter. Maybe it's too many reps for Jordan Davis. Maybe Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat had played too much. I did get the sense they were trying to get Nolan Smith on the field a little bit more, at least in the first half. And maybe they have to get a second wind at a certain point. But I think we're at the stage with this defense. Yeah, I mean, if those guys don't get home, the defense is going to struggle. Now, I picked Dallas to win this game 33-28. Dallas is a good offensive team, and they did their part. They got to 33. The Eagles' offense didn't do their part. Sometimes you're going to have to win a shootout in the modern NFL, and Dallas is one of those teams. They average 40 points at home. I mean, they're good. They're good against everybody. So there are some other teams. There was a 3-0 game today. There were 2-0 games at halftime. There are a lot of other teams that struggle offensively, and that's where sort of those numbers pick up. The Eagles happen to find the two teams that are the best offenses back to back, and they struggled mightily on defense. That doesn't mean Arizona is going to come in and score 40 or Tommy DeVito is going to ring you up for 45. That part of it will calm down. The question is, when you get to the big spot against Dallas or San Francisco, can you find a way to win the game? Can you find a formula? You're going to give up a certain amount of points. So the offense is a part of this as well. It's a complementary game, and that's what professional football is. Is Jalen Hurts going to fumble occasionally? Yes, he's a quarterback. Is A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith? That's unacceptable. So, maybe those fumbles turn into touchdowns and it's a much closer game. So they have to clean that kind of stuff up. They had 10 penalties today. They have to clean that up. They have to clean up the stuff they can. But there are some personnel deficiencies they're probably not going to overcome. And that starts most notably on the back end. Unless you think Shaq Leonard's going to turn into the all-pro Shaq Leonard he was before the back surgeries in Indianapolis.
Of all the things to correct, that's not one that I'm confident in, unfortunately, John. But when you look at the rest of this schedule, and you look at the schedule right now for Dallas and also San Francisco, Philly and San Fran, they're the only ones there. They have 2 games on the road and 2 games at home. Dallas, 3 games on the road of the last 4. When you look at this Eagles team going forward, what's your confidence level in them maintaining the number 1 seed or getting the number 1 seed, or just rather winning the NFC East?
I think it's going to be tough. I mean, Baltimore's got to beat San Francisco. That's probably the game you have to look at and say they're going to need they need some help. Even if they win out, they're going to have San Francisco lose once. So the number 1 seed has become much tougher. And the NFC East is still, if the Eagles can find a way to get a win in Seattle, I think they're going to win the NFC East because I can't imagine the Giants beating them. I can't imagine Arizona beating them. So I think the NFC East is still there for them. The number 1 seed might be a little bit more difficult.
John, earlier you said every team goes through things like this. But you look at that defense, even before this Dallas Cowboys game, we knew the Cowboys game was a tough spot on the road, back-to-back against 2 tough teams. But you look at what this defense did in the last 5 games before this, And there were only 5 teams in history whose defenses had put up stat lines that bad as far as net yards, passing yards, touchdowns, yards per carry. Do you think this is something that they can get corrected with the personnel they have on that side of the football?
Well, it depends what you mean by corrected. Are they going to be historically bad, or are they going to be middle of the road? Could they be middle of the road? Yeah, probably, especially against average or below average teams. But no, I don't think we're going to see, a top 5 defense. It's just clearly they don't have that type of personnel right now. And maybe, we all should have expected that, losing 5 defensive starters, losing the coordinator. But everybody hated the coordinator so much, they failed to realize just how good that defense was. I mean, even when they didn't have Hassan Reddick and they were playing Jannard Avery, in the first season Nick was here, they were a top 10 defense. And then they were number 2 last year with 70 sacks. And by the way, even if you brought back Jonathan Gannon and Javon Hargrave and C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Marcus Epps and T.J. Edwards and Kaiser White, they weren't getting 70 sacks again. There was going to be a regression to the mean from that aspect as well. But to think they were going to lose all of that and just move along the same way was probably a little bit pie in the sky. Not probably. You're seeing it. This defense is a disaster right now.
John, thank you for hanging out with us so late. We really appreciate it, and we will talk to you. Hopefully that now that game's a big game in Seattle on a Monday night. Hopefully they don't lose that game, but we will talk to you next week. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name's Jason Lombardi. I'm an inspector at DryTech. At DryTech we offer 3 major services, the first one being basement waterproofing. The second service we offer is foundation and structural repairs. And then the third service that we offer is mold remediation. If you feel you are having a waterproofing issue, give DryTech a call or check us out online.